And now, broadcasting from Titletown, USA, here's Joe Simon.
Welcome in. When we talk about retirement growth and savings, we have to know a little bit about the tax environment in which we live in. And that's why we bring in our guest today, Kurt Healing, CPA, a Wisconsin gentleman farmer. Welcome in, Kurt.
Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Great. Hey, I know we have people that have this image of CPAs, and you're not that guy. So I'm going to give you a little space here as we get rolling into this seriousness of tax strategy and preparation. Tell us just a second about what your gentleman farmerly duties include on a weekly basis.
Well, we've got a horse farm that our family works with. My wife, my daughter, and we've got several horses. So earlier this week, I've been to the vet this week with the horse. I have loaded up hay already this week. So mucking stalls, all that kind of fun stuff.
Nice, nice. And then you come to this, and here we
Yes,
are, and we're
yes.
talking about taxes and tariffs and what's going to happen. Well, I think the nice thing, I think back to maybe 6, 7 months ago when you and I are chatting about this, is what's going to happen with the taxes, and that seems to be pretty clear. As we look back to 2017, 2018, Trump signed a nice little proposal. It was approved, and here we skated through those years. You and I have talked about our feelings on taxes are on sale, and I guess the sale continues. So our conversation today, we're gonna, as we've done in our prep meeting, there's three things we want to concentrate on today, and get right down to brass taxes. Is the non-spousal beneficiary tax planning for parents. That's a big one. And it's important that we address those issues, especially from your perspective. Number two is Roth conversions, and everybody's been talking about that. That plays into a lot of the planning that I think people that are in their 50s, 60s, 65, starting to look at Social Security, Medicare. Hey, you pick up this $1 million IRA, pay the taxes, cross the bridge, and now it's in a Roth. You may just have really caused big problems for your household. So hold on for that. We're going to talk about that. And then lastly is it's finally, I think we can finally say people are waking up on the advisor side about the realities and the costs of long-term care. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, some refreshed numbers on that, what it really costs today, and some traditional ways and some hybrid ways that have been introduced in the marketplace that it's just good to know about, and it might fit somebody that's listening today. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
Let's go with the non-spouse beneficiary tax planning question. You brought that up. That seems high level. How do we ease into that, Kurt?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind, I'll give you a little bit of history. Before 2018, 2019, the rules were if you inherited an IRA and you weren't the spouse, so basically the children inherited an IRA, they could take that IRA and take the distributions over the course of their lifetime based on their own age. So, for example, when my mother passed away in 2006, I was 40 years old. I could take the distributions based on a 40-year-old, and I take that over the rest of my lifetime. I never touched the principal on that.
Right.
And so what happened in 2018, 2019, the rules were changed where now you have to take that IRA and you have to completely drain that IRA within 10 years, whether it's a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. It has to be drained within 10 years. And so we talk a lot about Trump tax breaks and things like that. This is actually one of the hugest tax increases that has ever been gone through. Because think about it. If mom or dad passes away in their 80s and the kids inherit this, they're inheriting this money in their late 50s, early 60s, which is their highest earning years. And now you're going to take this IRA money and dump it on top of what they're earning. You've just increased their taxes dramatically. And so that's one of the things that we look at from a planning perspective is on the front end with mom and dad, how do we prevent that hit? And on the back end with the kids, how do we plan for the distribution of that money so we can minimize the tax hit?
Yeah. Yeah. So, in your experience as you're talking with clients from the CPA side, is this something that people come in and go, "Yeah, we've been hearing all about this at fish fries and the baseball and football games, and everybody's talking about it that's in our age group," or is this something that people stare at and you go, "You got to be kidding me"?
A little bit of both, and
Okay.
some of them think that the simple, easy solution is okay. I inherited $100,000. I'll just take $10,000 every year, and in some cases that might work. Especially if you're talking bigger dollars. Let's say you inherit $500,000. Now you're just going to take $50,000 every year and add it onto your income.
Right.
There's two things that don't come into play there. Number one, you're not factoring in the rest of your income and the effect that it has on it. Number two, you're making the huge assumption that that money's not going to grow over the next 10 years. If you get a couple of years like we
Yeah.
had in 23 and 24, you might not even be hitting the principal on that money. And so then you get to the end of years 8, 9, 10, and all of a sudden there's all this money still there that needs to get distributed out.
Okay.
Now what
So
are you
you,
going
you made us angry, Kurt. Good job. What are some of the suggestions you're seeing that are really working during this time and hour?
Well, I think that from an annual basis, you need to take a look at what's the value of that IRA. And in addition to that, you need to take a look at what's the rest of the income going to be. And you kind of pick I want to pick a number, say it's going to be at the top of the 22% bracket or whatever bracket you might be, and say, that's where I want to target. That's what I want to hit. And then, keeping in mind, is this going to be enough that we're going to be able to drain this account within 10 years?
Right. And there are other techniques and solutions that, as you and I work together, from an insurance perspective, that we can ease into and look at in different cases with when we see different models. One thing that comes up, and I know we didn't really talk about this beforehand, but it just naturally comes to mind as we're talking about this. So let's say um, I'm somebody that has this really nice IRA. I'm now in whatever age, I guess it doesn't really matter, but I don't have any family. And so I picked my favorite neighbor, not related, as the beneficiary of this qualified, never taxed money. Can you just take a minute or two to talk about those issues?
Sure, because in that situation, you've got somebody inheriting this money that, there may not be family ties, like you said, but they still fall in this category of non-spouse beneficiary. These rules still apply to them. And so even that beneficiary's got to take this into consideration. One thing that we have seen done and this sounds a little counterintuitive because we're trying to do this with older people and it can get expensive, is put insurance on the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my wife, for instance, works with underwriters, and she's been doing this now since about 2020. And she said one time, she says, "Why are people getting all these policies, insurance policies, life insurance policies on 70, 75, 80-year-old people?
Mm-hmm.
The policies are expensive." I said,
Right.
"Yeah, they're really expensive. But you know why they do it? It's so the kids don't have to pay the taxes on the
Mm.
IRAs they inherit. So they get
Yeah.
an insurance policy that pays the taxes on the IRAs as opposed to paying the taxes themselves out of pocket." So
Right.
that's one way that people have kind of worked around this as well.
So to be clear, back to my favorite neighbor for a minute, she inherits $1 million after I die. No relation. She has 10 years to divest herself out of that.
Exactly. So
Okay.
so she has 10 years to divest herself out of that. There was some back and forth as to whether or not she needed to take minimum distributions if the person that passed away was taking minimum distributions, and
Hmm.
and it's been decided that is a requirement. Why you wouldn't take a distribution, I don't know, unless you've got something else going on in your financial situation. But typically, since these rules came into effect, everybody I've worked with has typically taken distributions starting year one all the way through. The only difference is how much based on their tax situation.
Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about, you brought up Irma, and that is not the name of my favorite next door neighbor. This is, there's schedules involved with this. Income related monthly adjustment amount is what that refers to. Let's get into that. Tell us about Irma.
Irma is an interesting concept that came about. This goes back several years already. It helps determine what a Medicare premium is going to be for those people that are on Medicare.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of ties in with the discussion we were talking about a little bit earlier about deciding, income planning, I guess, for lack of a better term. Because what happens is with Irma, once you clear this a certain threshold, and that threshold can be around $200,000. It changes every year. It'll probably go up again this coming year. Um, if once you go over that, the amount you pay for Medicare 2 years later increases,
Right.
and it increases by roughly 50%. And then the next threshold after that will be double what the normal Social Security would be, or Medicare would be.
Mm-hmm.
So in those situations, you really need to be cognizant of your income planning. So not only from the income tax side, but IRMA is another. Basically, it's a tax because it's the government extracting money from you, which
Yeah.
is everybody's definition of tax. You can call it what you want. So in those situations, you really want to watch that level because that's one of those things where if you go over by $1, you pay the next level. There's no sliding scale.
Right.
So you really want to make sure that you're cognizant of that.
So this is involving Medicare Part B as in boy and Part D as in dog. You
Correct.
talked about, there's a schedule that I'm looking at here, and we can send that to you. I'm sure your office could provide that, or just you'll see my email at the end, and we'll get that to you if you're interested in seeing it. We're not going to try to send that verbally to you and have you memorize it. But where it starts is at that 106 to the 212 category, and then it jumps a bracket to 133 to 266. And as your earnings continue to increase, wherever you fall in this multiple ratio schedule here, the costs go up. There's a premium attached to these nice benefits that we all get when we're qualified as American citizens to get into this. And the reason I think Kurt and I are interested in talking about is this takes us back to the every advisor. We're hearing the ads, we're seeing it out there. Taxes are on sale. Cash in your IRAs and your 401ks and move them over to the Roth IRA today because this is the best thing to do. The big caution then comes back to the schedule that we're talking about, right, Kurt?
Yeah, that's one of the things that can come into play and really bite someone is if you decide to just take all your IRA money and let's use the $1 million example that you used earlier. If you take that $1 million, okay, that $1 million is considered taxable income. It shows up on your tax return. Your IRMA is going to be based on that $1 million being earned income. So 2 years later, you're going to get big surprises as far as what your Medicare is on top of the tax that you actually have to pay. And keep in mind with the Roth conversion, you have to pay the tax out of other funds. You can't necessarily pay it out of the converted funds
Because
because
it's taxable.
exactly. So
Yeah,
it can kind of turn into a vicious cycle real
yeah,
quickly. And then
yeah.
where does the money come from to pay that? Well, you got to pull that out from somewhere. So when you do Roth conversions, you really want to tread carefully and make sure that you're staying within these parameters of things like IRMA or there's another situation we can talk about a little bit as well. If you're not in a situation where you're on Medicare yet, maybe you retired early and you're on marketplace health insurance, you really
There
want to
you
watch
go.
your income level because the more your income goes up, the more your health insurance goes up, and that goes up even more dramatically than IRMA. Um, so you really want to watch the effects of Roth conversions and what that has on your insurance premiums there as well.
But it's such a nice idea. Paying
It's a
the
great idea,
taxes,
and it's a great idea,
never paying again.
yeah, and you have all these different people saying Roth, 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 and it's great, but you don't necessarily want to go from 0 to 100.
Yeah, our tax friend Ed Slott, who we've both sat before and listened to, likes to talk about that by calling it tax infected money, and that makes
Correct.
a statement of an impression in your mind. Tax infected money. It's never been taxed. It will be taxed. It's growing. You're at the most vulnerable part in your life, and now you've got to pay tax on this beautiful thing you did in saving for all these years.
And the
Um,
hard part with that is, the boomers that are retiring now for the last 40 years have been conditioned defer, 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 defer,
right.
defer, 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 because you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you
When
retire.
they're
And now
retired.
we're finding out that that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. All right. So let's move to the next subject. And we have a few minutes to dig into this. We could have a whole podcast on it, and that's long term care. So, what we know today is the costs are now at about $150,000 a year for assisted living or skilled nursing. We know that those costs are now at a 7% inflationary rate annually. So 150 plus 7% plus 7%, it just continues to snowball. We also know that when you're 65 or older, the statistics from the industry show that 70% of us are going to be needing some type of long term care that could be 2 years to as much as 5 years. And I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing here. Oh, yeah, let's talk about the shortage. There's a shortage of employees in healthcare. And of course, long term care is a big part of healthcare. So that's not precluded. So you add all these things up. And you know what? Having choices when you're at the most vulnerable ages of your life are probably one of the best benefits you can try to plan on in capturing. And that's really the message when we talk about long term care. So I wanted to bring you in on that because there have been some changes. As we've talked, there's really three ways to look at long term care and what you're going to do financially. You can self insure it. Well, you just heard the math on how expensive that could be. So when you get in a facility, you better get out pretty quick because it's going to cost you a lot, especially if you still have another spouse that's living back at your home. That becomes a very expensive and very stressful situation for not only you, but then you have to start thinking about your kids because they're thinking about you more than ever. So that's a thought before you think that's the way you're going to do it. The second way is the traditional way of long term care insurance. There are some solid providers that continue to work and change. I was talking to a well known advisor several months ago now, and he said, I don't do that. And I said, what don't you do? I don't talk about long term care insurance. I said, why is that? He said, because you can't count on it. So I just don't bring it up. I don't talk about it. And I really looked at him and I said, well, I'm going to play the opposite side of that and say, I think you're practicing malpractice. And he looked at me, what do you mean by that? I'm doing all these things for him and helping him. And I said, and guess what? You sold him that annuity where they moved $1 million into. It has a 7-year surrender. And now they need a lot of money for their long term care that they didn't plan on 3 years into that 7-year surrender. Now, most annuities will allow you for that purpose to get in without penalties, but it certainly changes a plan that they weren't thinking of for long term care needs. And you never addressed it with your client. So I say all of that to say, yes, there aren't any long term care insurance companies that guarantee premium any longer, meaning the premium is going to stay that way for the rest of your life. They'll send you a nice little note giving you a warning. 6 months from now, we're bumping the rates and it's going to be this. That's just the way that industry works. That's the way it has to survive. And if you want to talk more about that, we can do that offline for you that are listening today. Those still work. We have clients that look at it, get into them all the time. But what is developed from that is long-term care riders on life insurance policies, as well as hybrid. And that's really where I want to drill down today and talk to you about that, Kurt. are hybrid long-term care insurance products, solutions out there. What's been your experience and what's your feeling on that as we talk about hybrid long-term care?
Well, one of the interesting things that's come along with these hybrids is you can use an annuity, for instance, to help fund long-term care, and the annuity can be inside an IRA or outside an IRA. And when you think about where the bulk of a lot of people's net worth is outside their home, it's usually within their IRA and 401k. So you might have somebody who's got 500 or $1 million inside their IRA, and maybe they only have 50 or $100,000 outside their IRA. That makes it real difficult from the standpoint of using a hybrid outside the IRA, but inside the IRA, you can get a product that will be geared towards long-term care, that will allow you to fund long-term care and become taxable only if the long-term care um, benefits are activated.
Right.
And then it comes out taxable, but at that point, you've also got the long-term care deductions from the medical deductions to help offset that. It doesn't offset it dollar for dollar, but it comes close, and it helps from a tax standpoint.
And that is an excellent situation. You and I have a client that we're doing a joint case on, um, and the situation is real quick. And this is Main Street America, Main Street USA, all the way. A closely held organization. Let's say they're $10 million. Family involved heavily in all aspects of the business in multiple parts, and now mom and dad are selling the business to the kids who are adults in their 30s and 40s. And we started to talk about, you did the tax planning side, and I looked at where their money was at, and it's time to pivot was the pretty much the headlines of what we were talking about. And we discovered one of the only solutions by reputable insurance carriers out there. This one hybrid in particular, who's been doing this for 5 years now, will allow this money to come in. It's been approved, where we could take, let's say, we'll use $1 million between mom and dad business owner, and they have these IRAs or 401ks. And now all of a sudden, we opened up a whole new aspect of how they can save and prepare to offset the costs of long term care. And what made it even more spicy was they were dealing with one of their parents that was going through that right now. So they had real time images in their mind of all the things that were going on as they were transitioning and selling their business. They didn't want to put that burden of any kind onto their kids who were going to be taking over the business. So we really were able to sort of create a wellspring of where they didn't think they had any extra money. And what I really like to walk away with is, I think it's when you get to a certain age in your life, let's say it's around 55, it's time to have beneficial money. If there's more than one thing that we can do with that money, and we come to a crossroads in our life and it's time to make some decisions, we're not hampered by, well, this thing only works if you're left handed and this thing only works if you're right handed. What happens if you're ambidextrous? Today's the day we can flip it and use it for that purpose, and flip it back when we want to use it the other way. Does that seem to sort of make sense?
Yeah, that's really what we're getting at here, because when you think about the IRA money, your first thought with this is it's retirement income.
Right.
And for the bulk of that money, that's primarily what it's going to be used for. But if
Yeah.
you can carve off a portion of that so that you're not cutting into the household income, not cutting into the grocery money, but there's a corner of it over there that you can use for one of these products, and identify that that's going to be the long-term care money, it really slices up that pie in a way that's much more palatable than having to pull that money out, have it be taxable, and then pay the premiums. And then, for instance, with a traditional long-term care policy, you don't necessarily know if you're ever going to activate that policy or not. If you die
Right.
peacefully in your sleep, then
And
it's kind
and
of like
we've
car
had
insurance.
we've
It's kind
had
of like car
clients
insurance
that
that
are
you've never had. If you don't have an accident, you paid car insurance, but you don't have an accident. That's money, that you never see again.
Sort of like the way in which a term life insurance policy works. You got $1 million term life insurance policy, and the only way you win is when you die and your family gets the money, or your partner in business gets the money. That's been an irritant with long-term care, the traditional version. If you don't use it, it just goes away and all that premium stays with the insurance company. Well, if that's irritating to you, if you've heard this story before, there's a new way to do it. And we just talked to you a little bit about it, this hybrid approach to long-term care. And it really is utilizing the beautiful part to an insurance principle, and that is pennies for dollars. We're putting in pennies and we're allowing this IRA money to multiply not only by the growth that we want to see in it, that's kind of a one-on-one approach to saving money, but on the backside of that, it really becomes a long-term care policy with a more robust amount of money that's allowed for to use for long-term care.
Correct. So there's a the old term, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's really a good fit in this situation.
Well, Kurt, we really appreciate your time today. We're going to have you come back at another time, maybe a few months into this year of 2025. There's always something new. There's maybe the tariffs and how that's going to affect something. We haven't heard much about Social Security not being taxed, tips not being taxed. I think there might be some other things that come down the way. You never know. And it's always good to have you in our toolbox, Kurt. So we definitely appreciate your time today.
Always a pleasure to be with you. By that time, we might have the big, beautiful bill.
I love beautiful. So hold tight. If you need to get a hold of Kurt, the best way to do that is just contact me. You'll hear my email at the end, and we'll be happy to facilitate the specific questions. So until later, thank you for tuning in today. Have a fabulous day, and continue to do your best out there. Remember, it's 86,400 seconds in a day. Make them count.
You've been listening to the Joe Simon Podcast. Big ideas with powerful stories and real-time solutions. Business succession planning, executive benefits, employee benefits, tax beneficial savings, and more. Remember, information discussed here today is dated and not specific to your situation. Always seek personal counsel from qualified advisors. For more about Joe Simon, go to DaVinciInsurance.com. Joe Simon is a licensed insurance agent in the state of Wisconsin. Licensed to advise on accident and health, life insurance, disability insurance, and annuities, as well as qualified long-term care insurance. Make sure to visit the DaVinciInsurance.com archives for more of our podcasts.